Everyone, and welcome. We want to welcome our guest, Daryl Hedding, Deputy Director of International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, USA. And so, Daryl, good evening, and how are you tonight? Daryl, you need to unmute.
Oh, you're muted now, Daryl. Unmute yourself there, brother.
I guess I got muted as well.
Well, good evening.
Thanks for having me on, Tim. It's great to be with you here this evening, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
As am I. I remember meeting a lady, Daryl, from university in Tel Aviv, and she had a bit of an accent. And in talking with her, I said, Diane, I'm trying to discern if your accent is British, Australian, or South African. And she said, well, which of those three do you think it is? I said, South African. And she says, you're right. And so I know that is your home of origin, is it not?
That's correct, Tim. Yeah, originally from what I call the very deep South.
Well, that's for sure. And it's good to have you. Daryl, let's get started. We wanted to cover a few areas of basics. And I am extremely intrigued at the founding of the International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem, also known as ICEJ, founded in 1980. What happened in 1980 to bring ICEJ into existence?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. It was actually birthed in a way out of a prayer meeting. So there were Christians that were meeting for prayer, and they decided to start celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, to bring the nations up to Jerusalem as an expression of support for the state of Israel, for Jerusalem, but also an understanding of what God was doing in Israel at the time and regathering his people back to the land, of restoring them back to their land and to himself, and what that means in terms of Christ's return. And, you know, the Feast of Tabernacles spoken of in Zechariah 14 is one of those feasts specifically mentioned that we will celebrate in the millennial reign. So it was kind of a prophetic statement to the world and a statement to Israel of where we believe things are going. And that very first feast, just before that, Israel passed a law declaring Jerusalem its capital. And as you can imagine, this did not go over well with the nations of the world. And 13 of the major embassies actually moved out of Jerusalem to Tel Aviv in protest and under threat of oil embargo by the Arab nations. That, of course, provoked this group of people getting ready to celebrate the feast to think, what are we going to do? I mean, sometimes, you know, with all your biblical theories and postures and stuff that you want to say, sometimes you actually have to make a stand on it when events happen, and events were moving quickly, and they said, you know what, we need to do something in support of Israel, in support of the Jewish claim to Jerusalem, a united Jerusalem under Israeli control. So they started the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, because they realized there are millions of believers around the world who support Israel, who stand with Israel, that want to give their support to Israel and let her know that, but they don't necessarily have a government that's willing to show that support. So while we're not an official embassy, we represent people from all around the world. We've got branches in over 170 nations around the world, representing Christians who support Israel. So, of course, that developed from there. We run different social projects in Israel. We work in many different areas in supporting the state of Israel and in different projects like Aliyah. And then, of course, in the nations where we have branches like here in the USA, we work very closely with churches and different Christian groups and grassroots believers to raise support for Israel, for the projects that we do in Israel, but also to help people understand Israel and Israel's place within God's economy.
Daryl, I'm intrigued by that, and we would certainly find ourselves supporting that wholeheartedly. And how did you become involved with ICEJ personally?
So then you got to go back to my South African connection. So growing up in South Africa, my dad being a pastor, actually spoke out against apartheid, right? The system of segregation in South Africa from the pulpit. He confronted it from the pulpit and biblically. This actually forced us in the mid-'80s to leave the country. As a family, where did we go? We ended up going to Israel. So my dad at that time served as the chaplain for the ICEJ. He was also on staff with King of Kings Assembly in Jerusalem. And that, in a way, paved the way for me later on to come back to Israel. After I had done my studies, I was living abroad. I just came back on a vacation, stopped in at the ICEJ. They heard about my experience and what I've been going through, and they basically offered me a position to come on. They had a position opening up in the finance department at that stage, and that's when I started. I was at a young age of about 23 when I started there in Jerusalem, and still working with the ICEJ today. I won't tell you how many years ago that was.
Well, I'm similar to that. I started in ministry at the age of 23 as well. But been with the Friends of Israel a little longer than that. I was pastoring for 10 years, and then I've been with Friends of Israel for the last 34. So I'll tell you how long I've been going. So that lets you know that. With your background with apartheid, how do you and personally handle that or deal with that accusation of Israel that Israel is an apartheid state?
Look, it's in one sense that it's helpful to have that background because you understand what apartheid is and what it is not. So, of course, under the South African regime, it was a white minority that was ruling over a Black majority. They did not let them attend the same schools. They could not live in the same areas. They could not vote, serve in government, any of these things. You look at Israel today, and if you go there, it is not an apartheid state in any sense of the word. I mean, in a previous government, which was, not long ago, of course, the governments are changing all the time in Israel, but there was actually an Arab party that was part of the government coalition in power. So for anybody to stand and state that Israel is somehow apartheid, it's just not true. There've been Arab justices that, of course, serve in the highest courts of the land, Arabs that serve as diplomats for the state of Israel. So look, if Israel's an apartheid state, they're doing a really, really poor job of it. They do not understand how this is supposed to work.
Yeah, that's true. I remember asking there was two individuals. One was an Ethiopian, and the other was someone else from outside of Israel, and they had made Aliyah to Israel. And so I asked them that question: how do you answer apartheid? And they just simply said, "Look at us."
Exactly.
That answers your question. An Ethiopian and another immigrant that came to Israel. Let's move on, Daryl, and let me ask you some questions about ICEJ. I know that you're involved in a variety of areas. What are some of those areas that ICEJ is involved in?
So, I mean, one of the areas we've been involved in right from the start is Aliyah, which is the return of the Jewish people to come home. So, of course, with the organization starting in the 80s, one of the biggest issues that came up was all the Jews that found them trapped behind the Iron Curtain, right? So we immediately started a movement to get them released. And then while we were working on that, we put systems in place to actually help them get out once they got out of Russia. So today, I think we've helped somewhere in the region of about 150,000 Jews in one way or another come home to Israel. Today, we're focused on regions like the Ukraine. We've seen a big upsurge in Ethiopian Aliyah over the last few years. They're still pouring in, but really from all quarters of the earth, far away, whether it's South America, even in Europe, places like France, of course, Germany, wherever it is. We've even, seen Chinese Jews come home. We've helped them come back to Israel. The name Menashe Jews from the tribe of Manasseh in northern India. So we've been active in helping them come back. So that's been an important part of our work. But, on the ground in Israel, of course, we're looking back in the 80s, Israel was not the kind of well-developed state that it is today. So a lot of our work was really focused on social assistance and helping the poor and needy. Now, we still do a lot of that because Israel has a big influx of immigrants, right? Of Jewish immigrants that come back. Many of them are coming from third world situations. They need help. There is still a lot of poverty in Israel. So we do still do a lot of outreach in social assistance. But some of our major projects in Israel today are a little bit different. So we actually run an assisted living home for Holocaust survivors. It was the first of its type in Israel. When we discovered back in 2009 that there were literally hundreds of Holocaust survivors that were alone. They were ending their lives in loneliness and misery without comfort, friendship, and basic needs. So we invested in a home for them that they can come together. They have community. They have a roof over their heads. They have all their medical, dental needs taken care of, all their meals, and they love it. And it's in a wonderful place for us as Christians as well to show that love to Holocaust survivors, those who went through so much, and so much of it at the hands of so-called Christians. And then, of course, we place bomb shelters in Israel. So we've placed hundreds of bomb shelters along the southern border of Israel, which is targeted by Hamas frequently, as you know, with rocket attacks. They only have about 15 seconds to find shelter. That's not enough. So you've got to place these bomb shelters in critical areas. We're talking about bus stops. We're talking about daycares, playgrounds, these kind of things. And it makes a difference, not only, of course, saving lives, giving that security, but giving that peace of mind. If you can imagine you're a Jewish mother who has to send her child off to daycare, you don't know when a rocket's coming in, if it's going to land on that daycare, if your child is coming home. For them to have that peace of mind, that their children will be safe catching buses and moving around or going to daycare really helps people even mentally just face the situation. And we know that they're strong. The people that live in the South through everything that they've been through, but still it's important. And I think it sends a real message of support, unlike any other, for Christians that are willing to invest. They're costing $26,000 a pop for one of these bomb shelters. For us to be investing in hundreds of these to be placed down there, and they come with plaques saying, this has been donated by Christians from this nation or that nation, that they know that there's love and support for them, which they need to. They need to know that. It's not enough for us just to do it. They actually need to know that we do it, right?
Just a brief logistical moment. Good evening, everyone. And you are listening to the Friends of Israel. This is our Thank God for Israel Day, and we are talking with, I should say, Daryl Hedding, Deputy Director of International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, here in the USA. And if you have a question, please put it in the chat, and those will be forwarded to me. And we'll be happy to take those questions at the end of our discussion tonight. Should you be interested in giving to either organization, you can be involved by giving to either International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, ICEJ, or you can give to the Friends of Israel, FOI.org, ICEJ.org, ICEJUSA.org, for specifically contacting Daryl. And again, good evening, Daryl. We're continuing our discussion. I saw an interesting statistic of the number or percentage of Jewish people making Aliyah, and a large number were coming from Ukraine. And you mentioned it earlier. Let's talk a little bit about how ICEJ is involved with helping Ukrainian refugees.
So it's really a two-fronted involvement that we've been doing. So the first was when the conflict broke out, and you saw, the Russian military really move into some of these, highly populated areas. We realized that there were Holocaust survivors basically trapped in there. These are elderly people that cannot easily make a journey and wouldn't know even how to start such a thing to get out of there. There was just no option. They were going to be trapped. So we actually funded teams to go in and rescue them. We located them and got them out. And some of them are actually living today in our Haifa home for Holocaust survivors. One of those was Sheila. She's 85 years old. She's a widow who lost her husband some 12 years ago. Really had no hope. She was living in Kharkiv, which was being surrounded by the Russian military, bombed by them as well. And we got her out in April, and she's actually living happily in our Haifa home for Holocaust survivors today. So it's just an amazing way that God provided for this home and for some of these survivors, and all the miracles along the way, and just being able to go out and reach some of them and bring them back home. But of course, there's been a massive influx just of general aliyah from Ukraine, from Jews in Ukraine, and many of them, they don't have time to pack a lot or make big financial plans, or sell their home, or it's all of these obstacles that they're coming with very little. So we're doing everything we can as well, to what we call, to integrate them into Israeli life and to help them with all that they need in terms of, food and housing and clothing and so on.
How many areas in Israel does ICEJ have?
How many areas?
Yes.
We work throughout the land, really. So we try as much as we can to impact every community in some way, if possible. And we work in every demographic too. So I know sometimes people can maybe get critical that, we only, work in one area, or we're discriminating or not, but we really don't. So we work and we actually divide our budget up by the demographics. So we'll do aid projects as well within the Druze community, within the Arab community as well. And of course, throughout all the Jewish communities throughout the land as much as possible. That doesn't mean we hit everywhere, but we do attempt to. We work very closely with the social services in Israel to get a pulse on where the needs are and where to maneuver our aid.
Okay. Do you also work in the area of Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank?
Yeah, we don't do a lot in there, but we do from time to time run some aid projects in there as well, because we consider it, part of our outreach as well, just like anywhere else in Israel.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
With there's two questions that are coming to my mind. One, with the Haifa home, what are some of the day-to-day activities that are going on for the survivors who are there? What are some of their activities that they're involved with?
They do a lot of arts and crafts, different kind of games. And I think what happens is, like anywhere, people make friendships, and then they figure out what they like. So some of them, might like to play cards or do things like this. Of course, go for walks. It's a beautiful neighborhood that it's situated in as well, with quite lovely views. And then, there's all these holidays within the Jewish calendar. So we make sure that those are well celebrated at the Haifa home, and with a lot of joy and festivity.
Okay. The second question that comes to mind is, with your work in Aliyah, how did Jewish people find you? What's the process that they follow that you become involved in their attempt to go to Israel?
So it varies a little bit, depending on the situation. So for instance, if we're talking about Russian Aliyah, we coordinate very closely with the Jewish Agency, which has a really good pulse on, the situation in the country and the Jewish population there and their needs and so on. That of course is difficult today, given some of the problems that they're facing in places like Russia, but generally they operate in most regions, and we'll coordinate with them because they help with the processing side. We can't process people for Aliyah. You need the Israeli government's involvement for that. So we'll partner with them once they, to fill the needs. So whether it's sponsoring flights or some of their costs, sometimes, when you're talking about the Ethiopian Jews, they've had some issues before where we've had to put them up and house them in Ethiopia before they fly out. And that was especially true during COVID. When some of them got stranded, there was a bit of a COVID outbreak in the group and they had to be quarantined, and these kind of issues, we'll step in and provide for the hospital care. And, so it's on a need by need basis. But we work very closely with the Jewish Agency to make sure that people are processed correctly. And then you have the more kind of emergency situations, right, with Ukraine, where you're just, you're just running as fast as you can and hoping to get everything in place to that the agencies will catch up with it.
How do they come individually, Daryl, or are they coming in large groups?
So the ones that we're involved with are usually the larger groups that are coming out. So, you have these bigger groups, and to be honest, that's generally more the case from your third world countries or ones that, or third world situations, even not necessarily a third world nation, but maybe more of a developing nation. But some of them like that, where they've had this longing to come back, and there's a process of verification and so on, and then they need all the funding. So then it's flights and everything that goes into them coming across. From the Western countries, you find that there's a lot more independent aliyah. So people are, getting themselves processed, getting their visa and so on for Israel and coming across themselves. But we're not generally involved too much with that, unless it's a really needy situation. We've had some situations, as in France. You wouldn't think that there would be a lot of Jews in France that are in a needy situation, but there was actually a lot of Jews that fled Morocco, which was a French colony. So there was a lot of a kind of a natural attachment there. They fled Morocco and moved to France and ended up in some of the poorer neighborhoods, and actually got trapped when those neighborhoods became very strongly Islamic. And it became a threat to the Jewish population there. So that is a situation where we would help in a more of a kind of a group setting, working with the Jewish agency to make sure that they have a way to come out.
When you come to Israel and you're needing to place them in homes and things, how do you provide for their necessities, whether it's home, job?
Yeah, so Israel is amazing in terms of what the state does to care for them, to provide them with housing, to teach them Hebrew, to get them in the process of integrating into Israel. We come alongside that and try and meet the additional needs of those that are making Aliyah, and sometimes it comes down to trying to find really meeting the needs of the next generation. So some of those that will come, if they have young children, or they come and then they have children when they're in Israel, the parents very often will sometimes integrate to a certain extent, but the children will grow up in the Israeli schools and be Israelis. But sometimes, just because they come from a bit of a disadvantaged background, they can find it difficult to really reach their potential. So we actually engage in a mentoring program with those kids to bring other people alongside them. We call it shoulder to shoulder, and they come alongside these kids and actually help them and guide them through the process of getting the best out of life in Israel, making sure they're studying and progressing, because there are a lot of opportunities in Israel. They're great schools, great universities. There's a lot that they can achieve, but they need to be shown the right road, because they don't have parents that have that experience. So you don't often realize that what that means for somebody growing up in a society as advanced as Israel.
With that kind of contact and connection, do you have people who you've helped as ICEJ? Do they come back to you later and say, thank you, here's what we're doing? They give you stories of, from what it was like when they arrived versus what they've developed into. Do you ever have that kind of story?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And we've got a couple of videos up on our site that show this, especially within the Ethiopian Jewish community, of those that we've assisted that have gone on, some of them to positions, in the government position of some sort, who've come back and said, so with how thankful they were for the help that they got, because they needed somebody to just come alongside them and give them that support.
Absolutely. Where do you get the funding for providing for these immigrants?
So really, it's from our branches around the world. The biggest ones being in North America. So it's the US and Canada, and then Europe as well. So we've got one of our biggest branches is actually in Germany, and then also in Finland and Norway and the UK, Austria, Switzerland. And then as well in South Africa, we've got quite an active branch in South Africa too. that's very supportive of the work. So that's where our funds come in, from all the nations, really, and really in a grassroots sense. I don't think any of the branches are supported by, one single big donor or some foundation or something like that. It's really grassroots support from Christians who just love and support Israel.
And that is the heart. We believe that passage in Genesis 12:3, where God said to Abram, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you.
Amen.
And so we stand behind that. Currently in Israel just went through its elections.
Yeah.
And what involvement, if any, what relationship does that political action, or I should say political aspect, have with ICEJ? Are you a political organization or no?
We are not in that sense. I mean, we track what's happening, and actually our organization will have a webinar tomorrow morning just discussing the election that's gone on. The word from Israel, I think, is that Bibi's back. So it's interesting, and it provides a context for us to understand what's happening in Israel and to pray about the situation. So we don't get involved in a sense of telling Israelis who to vote for or taking sides in one party over another or anything like that. We believe Israelis need to work that out. We'll support Israel no matter who's in power there in the country. That our calling is to stand with Israel, not to decide, who should lead her nation. But having said that, in the nations, part of our calling, we believe, and our founding scripture is really taken from Isaiah 40, which says, to comfort ye, my people. So this idea of comforting Israel, but it goes on to say, a voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. And we really believe that we're called to also be a voice of warning to the nations that we're in of their treatment of Israel, going back to what you just quoted, Genesis 3, you bless Israel, there's a blessing for you, and you curse, so there's a cursing for you. And especially in a national sense, we understand that. So in the nations, we will from time to time take a political stand, if you will, on issues where we see our nation drifting, or nations, and here in the US included, on different issues when we see that something needs to be said, when we see our nation drifting away from its principles on Israel. We were very heavily involved in petitioning the candidates before the 2016 election on Israel. When Trump won, then we continued petitioning him about his pledge to move the embassy to Jerusalem. So thankfully that worked out, but it's just an instance of, something where we had been very involved and active on it. And something like that we felt was important to be involved in. We've also done petitions against the nuclear deal with Iran, because the existential threat it faces, it poses to Israel. So in topics like that, we will get involved politically, but like I said, on the Israeli front, we tend to stay away from their internal politics.
I remember two things as you were talking. One, when you talk about the rise of anti-Semitism and confronting the nations about their role with Israel, I was standing in front of the UN. I was going there for a visit, and my phone went off. So I answered it, and a friend said, "Where are you?" So I said, "I'm standing in front of the most anti-Semitic place on planet Earth."
Yeah, you're not wrong.
You're at the UN?
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Most anti-Semitic place on planet Earth. And then the other thing is that as you were talking, I remember being in a store and a person criticizing Israel for their policy. And I said, "Sir, it's pretty easy for you to criticize Israel here in the US. You don't have to live with the decisions that you're talking about."
Yeah,
they do. They have to live with that every single day. So
yeah,
maybe if you want to do that, you can make a difference by moving there.
Yeah.
And so that's that, I would totally agree with everything you said. It's pretty easy for us to try and tell them, but it's not our role. It's not our part. We are there to be a blessing and encouragement and to help and to come alongside, but they have to live with the decisions that are made. And with that,
Exactly.
what's your reaction to Bibi's victory?
I've always had a bit of a soft spot myself for Bibi. So just being the statesman that he is, I think you look at his record, of course, quite an astute guy. He really is credited and should be credited for what he did for Israel's economy. When he was finance minister, people don't realize that, but when he wasn't prime minister, which was, for a brief period, he actually served as finance minister, and this was before the 2008 crash. And he put policies in place which weren't popular too much at the time, I might add, but actually saw Israel come out of that 2008 crash stronger than most nations. Her currency was better, her economy was better, really laid the platform for the kind of success that she's had today. And of course, the staunch defender that he is of Israel, especially on the international front, and his ability to articulate that in places like the UN, I think has always been valuable to Israel. I don't think they've seen another leader who can quite do that in the same way in the last few decades. Look, I'm not, if I'm the Israeli front, I'm not as involved in the local politics. I realize, like any politician, there's frustration and areas where I'm sure he could do better. So, I realize, my view is, very limited and keyholed in a way in terms of what, I want to see out of a leader in Israel compared to what Israelis want to see. So, it's quite possible that there are better options out there today that I'm not too familiar with, but say what you want. Bibi's obviously quite a smooth political operator by this time. You don't get to be prime minister for as many years as he has without being so, because it's not easy to actually form a government in Israel, as you would have noticed if you've been following the last few years. So credit to him for what looks like he's pulled it off again. We'll see how long it lasts.
That's the big question right there. How long does it last? And it seems like it could be more solid than the previous administration, but we'll never know. It's a tenuous situation, and
they definitely have a vibrant democracy.
It's interesting you say that. I think it was Begin who brought an American into to visit a Knesset meeting, and there was shouting, people pounding on the desk, shoes flying on the desk, and he said, "This is democracy in action."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, there you go. It's democracy in action, all right."
Certainly, it gets a little wild.
It can, but welcome to life in Israel. And I remember being there, and my friend that I had gone to visit, he said, we found this tank unit. There were about 12 tanks out in the field, and
wow,
open field. And I said, "Sam, aren't they vulnerable to attack?" He said, "No, nobody bothers them." And then all of a sudden there was soldiers everywhere. They were on their maneuvers. They were out training.
Yeah.
And he said, "Do you want to go get some candy and food for them?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go." So we went and bought the food, and we got back to the tanks, and he said, where's the commander?" And they said, "He's right over there." So we went over to the commander's tank. He came down, and we gave him the gift of food. And it's like, you couldn't have done that in an American military installation at all. I mean, welcome to Israel. Welcome to Israel. So
it's definitely a different environment, that's for sure.
Absolutely, but it's dynamic. There's the word that it is. It's a dynamic environment, and certainly we'll be praying for Bibi in the coming days as the government is organized, and I was encouraged very much so that he had such a strong election this time.
Yeah.
And that goes a long way. Let's get back to ICEJ and two other areas that I want to discuss and have you expand on. One, prayer initiatives. You know, I was signing on today for the prayer initiative beginning. And so what are some of the prayer initiatives? Are they ongoing or are they based on specific emergency situations? What causes a prayer initiative from ICEJ?
So, you know, prayer has always been a core part of the ICJ's calling from the very beginning. Today, you know, with the changes in technology, a lot of that has moved online to Zoom calls like this. And that we really started that, let's say, in about 2011, not so much online, but that came later with, you know, Corona and everything. It kind of, you know, if there was a helpful spin-off, let's say, was people's acceptance to use Zoom calls like this to meet with other people. So with that, we launched what we call the Global Prayer Call every Wednesday. So we meet that usually it's at 4 o'clock Israel time. Today that's 9 a.m. if you're in Central Time, 10 a.m. Eastern. Of course, if our clocks change back or whatever, their clocks just change. It usually is an 8-hour difference between us and Israel. So that's on Wednesdays, and that's every single Wednesday that we're praying. We do prayer points that come from our head office. But of course, if there's emergency issues, we try to cover those as well. And then we have what we call the Rosh Chodesh, which is the beginning of the month, where we have some 72 hours of continuous prayer rolling across the world, really, through the time zones, where all the nations gather and pray for hours for Israel. And that's at the beginning of every month that we have people involved with that as well.
Okay. It reminds me of the command that God gives in Psalm 122, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They will prosper that love you. And I agree with you very much that as hard as some areas COVID has been, one of the blessings of COVID has been the technology of being able to meet like this. Our own organization at Friends of Israel, we're able to do the same on Wednesday in our chapel service, bring in our whole staff from around the world. This morning we were meeting. And so I very much agree with you on that impact of being able to touch the world from where we're sitting.
No, and I think it's helped people get closer. I was just over in Israel for our Feast of Tabernacles celebration. We took a tour over there of Americans. And we were some of the Americans who joined, you know, the prayer call every Wednesday, and we were walking through the halls of the conference, or people got up on stage. They were like, I know that person from the prayer call. What's his name? Or who is she? She's so familiar. She prays. I pray with her every Wednesday. So it's just amazing. You know, it creates a sense of family and unity together, coming together. So it's, you know, it's an amazing tool to make use of. And I think we're using it wisely for the kingdom is a good idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other question that I have is talk about the Jewish holidays that you were talking, especially with tabernacles and the celebration, not only at the Haifa home, but that's a major event for ICEJ, isn't it?
Yeah. So as I said, we've been celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles since 1980. So we'll generally get, you know, thousands of Christians who'll come up to Jerusalem from 100 different nations, who will gather together to worship. And, you know, it's a full-on conference. So there's speaking, worship, breakout sessions, and so on. Usually held in one or two different locations. So sometimes we've been down near the Dead Sea. This year we were also up in Galilee, and then the main event takes place in Jerusalem itself. One of the highlights of the event will be the Jerusalem March, where we'll march with other people through the streets of Jerusalem by our nations, handing out candy and flags to the Israelis, and they love it. They absolutely love it to see all the different nations coming in and supporting them and just that chance for some interaction with people from different countries. So it's a really, really special event for a lot of people.
How did it get started?
The Feast of Tabernacles?
Tabernacles. Yeah. I mean, I know that Tabernacles was a long time ago, but for your involvement in ICEJ and getting that going.
Yeah, no. So this was by, like I said, by believers that were living in the land in the late 70s. Most of them meeting for prayer, who decided that they needed to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. So two of the key people involved with that were Merva Watson out of Canada, actually, who had a vision for that, and also for what you could call Davidic worship. So really returning a lot of the Davidic style worship back to the church, in dance and banner ministry and all kinds of instruments. So really an art-filled expression of worship to the Lord that's very rich and quite unique. It really started a unique movement in music in the 80s that has continued to the day today, whether it's Paul Wilbur or Joshua Aaron or any of these are really recipients in some ways of that legacy.
Okay. Daryl, how do people get involved with ICEJ? We've been talking for a while. How do people get involved with ICEJ? How do they get involved with you? How do they contact you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the easiest thing, of course, go to our website, ICEJUSA.org. That's the US branch. So, where we can interact with you here in the US. Connect you with all of the projects and everything that we're doing in Israel. As I said, we take tours to Israel. So if you've not been to Israel, if that's something that you want to do, we'd love to take you. We try and make them as affordable as possible. We do tours during the feast, but we also do some during the year as well, with some of them for pastors, some of them for young adults, and some of them just for anybody who wants to go to Israel. The difference with our tours, it's not just going around Israel and seeing all the sites, but we really bring the biblical aspect to those sites. So the understanding of Israel at those places, the calling of Israel, but also what God's doing in the land at the moment in relation to that. So you're not just going and looking at, what happened 2,000, 4,000 years ago. You're actually viewing that in the context of a modern restored Israel and what God's doing today. So that's one of the most impactful things you can do in your life if you haven't been to Israel, is to actually go there. I know this, Tim, because you've been, but to actually go there and see your Bible come alive, and to meet God at those different locations is something incredible, for your faith, but also for your understanding of Israel, and connection to the land and the people there and what He's doing. I can't recommend it highly enough, to try and do that. So that's a key part. But of course, to be involved in what we're doing and our prayer ministry, if you're praying, for Israel, if you want prayer points, we can send you prayer points. We've got places on our website to sign up under prayer to get monthly prayer points, so you can not just pray, but you can have informed prayers about what's going on in Israel as well. And we think that's very important. And then of course, if people want to get behind the different projects that we're doing, there's ways to do that via our website too. And we're on Facebook. You can find us on Facebook too, the ICJ on Facebook, or Twitter or Instagram, whatever your fancy is.
And there's plenty of social media to choose from.
No shortage these days. Yeah,
for sure. Well, I know that we've been getting some questions, and now I have to go to a logistical one.
Tim, why don't you let me manage the questions for you, and then you can just host it. And I'll say this: you have a few here, so if anybody has questions that they want to contribute, they can go to their chat box and ask Daryl a question to all the topics that Tim and Daryl have been covering. But Betsy writes this, Daryl, and I thought the same thing as Betsy because you struck a chord, and I'm glad Betsy asked it. So here we go. Daryl mentioned a tribe in India descended from Manasseh. Where and when were they discovered or confirmed? DNA ? or known through the generations? So we'll start there, and then she has another question as well.
So, I mean, primarily, most of these tribes retain their own heritage. So they've held on to their Jewishness and their understanding of their own history. And that's true for what's called the B'nai Menashe as well. In terms of proving that, that's up to the Jewish state to Israel. They have their mechanisms for going and checking all the records and seeing that people check out that they are who they say they are.
Daryl, I know that Friends of Israel had many years ago a representative in Mumbai serving the Jewish community in Mumbai many, many moons ago. So wow. Just something in line with what you were talking about. Betsy also asked, does ICEJ have an office in northern Los Angeles area? Know of any Holocaust survivors in the LA area? So I guess, do you have an office in LA?
We don't have an office there. We do have lots of supporters in and around that area. And we'd love to come out and visit everybody there too. So that'd be great. Holocaust survivors, I'm sure there probably are some, but we're not that I know of.
Okay, and the last one, I'll just say Betsy also says this, which I'm glad she did. She said, I looked at your website before the program, very impressive. She'll be returning, she says, and finding ways to participate regularly. So great job, Daryl. You did a good job tonight, all right?
Well, and thank you, Betsy. That's very encouraging.
If you have any other questions, my friends, be sure to get in there as soon as you can and type them in, as long as we have Daryl, because I know his time is precious. And Tim, here we go. Okay, so Betsy says, thank you. Tim, do you have anything you want to add as people are thinking about adding some questions here?
Yeah, I do. With ICEJ, I had never, I'd heard of it, but I didn't know of its breadth and extent. And so what are some future areas that ICEJ is looking at becoming involved with, Daryl?
That's a good question. It really depends on the landscape and what goes on in Israel. I tell you the one thing that we've really been dipping our toes into, if you will, more and more, and you can see it on our website if you go and look at our objectives as an organization. And most of them you could say we've met in some way, except the last one. And that is actually to seek for reconciliation between Arab and Jew. But something that we've seen the Lord really do in amazing ways now is really, there's a movement towards reconciliation. And it's not just from us, but it's just organic in Israel. But we're playing a part of it. And I know we're praying and hoping that we can play more of a part in it. And it's primarily at the moment between Messianic Jews and Arab believers in Israel that you're just seeing a great movement towards one another of brotherly friendship and love and support. Even they've created worship songs together and so on. We had them at our Feast of Tabernacles performing together. So it's quite an amazing thing to see them coming together as that one new man. As an expression of love and support. And the Bible says that they will know you by how your love for one another. And I think that there can be a witness to the region and the world of what it can mean to be reconciled in Christ to him and to each other. So it's a wonderful witness. I know it's something we're involved in, we're praying for a lot, and we're believing that God will do something special. I do believe he gave us those objectives for a good reason. And I think that's one of the big ones that sits on the horizon. There are some serious obstacles, as you know, in the region to this. There's a lot of people who don't want to see that kind of thing happen. There's a lot of spiritual opposition to that, of course. There's some very strong spiritual powers in the region that have influence of a lot of people, and we'd like to see that broken as well. And we believe that could be a big difference for the peoples of the region generally, just outside of Israel. So those are some of your big picture issues, if you want. Go large or go home.
That's the old saying, isn't it? Go big or go home.
Yeah.
for yourself. Go
Hey,
ahead.
Tim, can I add too? Friends of Israel and ICEJ have a great relationship. Our executive director and and Susan Michaels and other Christian leaders are on the Christian Leaders for Israel together, which was started by ICEJ and Susan Michaels. And just recently, one of our very own Friends of Israel interns, her name is Alyssa Ruddle, out of Houston, a young 20-year-old. She wrote a chapter for a book that ICEJ will be publishing soon, that about the different generations of Christians who love and support Israel and the Jewish people, who have seen different phases of Israel's existence from their 1948 to today. And we were able to provide the youngest, I believe, of them, Alyssa Ruddle, who contributed a chapter as well. So a nice relationship that exists between Friends of Israel and ICEJ.
That's fantastic. And the American Christian Leaders for Israel as well will be hosting an event next year in DC in May to celebrate Israel's 75th anniversary. So I hope we can all meet in person for that one. In DC. I think it'll be a wonderful event, and it's a good time to come together across the Israel spectrum of those people who love Israel, not just Israel organizations, but there are many Christian organizations in the US who support Israel and stand with us. So many of us will be coming together as a show of solidarity and support for the state of Israel for his 75th anniversary next May. So that'll be exciting.
What kind of information will be available when that comes for getting that information out, Daryl?
Yeah, we're almost finished putting it all together. So it'll be up on our site and on the ACLR website. So aclforisrael.org is the website, or American Christian Leaders for Israel is what it stands for.
One last question from me. And that is, with all of the activities, well, actually two, all of the activities that ICEJ is involved with, what are some of the staffing needs that you have currently?
Yeah, so I mean, not so much here in the US, but in Israel, we're always looking for competent volunteers to come over. So go to ICEJ.org. Our main organization website, and you can look up some of the volunteer positions that are available. But we're always looking for people that are willing to come across to Israel and serve for a number of years. When I say it's volunteer, they actually provide housing and a meal and a small stipend every month. So it kind of covers your basic needs. If you're able to raise a bit of support from your church, have a little bit of funding, you can make it pretty well. So you don't have to be a fully funded, person being sent out in that manner. But we do just, ask for, a commitment of a few years. But I think we're always looking for people with different skills that are looking to contribute in that way and also have an amazing experience. So in Israel, it's a very, very exciting, vibrant place to live. The food's great, by the way. My second favorite place to eat food, I'm still partial to my South African diet, but definitely my second favorite place on earth to eat. It's great. So you won't go hungry while you're there in Israel. And the coffee's good too. If you're a fan of coffee, in my opinion, they make it the best. They're right up there with the Italians. So it's an amazing thing to experience, but worth praying about. I would caution you don't want to be there if your life is not in order with the Lord. You want to make sure you're in the right place with him, and that he's calling you out there. And if he does call you out there, he will provide for you and see it through. And I've seen that in my own life. I wasn't necessarily looking to go to Israel that much when I was young, but kind of felt God calling me to it, and can only attest to his faithfulness every single step of the way as I've followed him in that calling.
Sounds like a statement of Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, doesn't it, Daryl?
Mm-hmm.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths.
Amen.
And
Amen.
with all of the ministries that and services ICEJ is involved with. Do you have a personal favorite that you love being involved with at ICEJ?
So, it goes through different stages as you're involved in the ministry, I guess. At the moment, I really love going on the tours. And I get the opportunity to teach on the tours. And it's one of those things, I did not, coming from an accounting background, in my younger years, I was quite happy to just sit in a back office and crunch numbers and do my thing. But along the way, the Lord really pushed me to, stretch my boundaries and get involved in some other things. So teaching and speaking publicly was definitely not my forte, was not something I was interested in doing, but ended up doing it. And, I can only say that it's blessed me as much as hopefully anybody else, just to be able to share God's word and to do that on location in Israel is such an amazing blessing and privilege. I'm very, very thankful for that opportunity. And it blesses me just to see people's lives impacted in such amazing ways when they're in the land of Israel, and experiencing that and opening up God's word together and seeing it come alive in their lives. That for me at the moment, I would say is a highlight personally with what we do,
Yeah. Well, Daryl, this has been a wonderful time. You've been joining us. I'm Tim Munger with the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry, meeting with Daryl Hedding of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, USA. And again, should you want to contribute to either organization, you can do so. ICEJ.org will get you to the website for ICEJ. FOI.org will get you to the Friends of Israel. And this has been our Thank God for Israel Day. For me, Daryl, this is my favorite at Friends of Israel. All my responsibilities and activities, I love doing Thank God for Israel Days and being able to interact with people involved with Israel. And it certainly has been a delight and joy to be with you and the ICEJ tonight. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your heart for Israel. And we've got a little extra time. So Chris, do we have any other questions?
We have no more questions, but I would like to end with this, Tim. The Thank God for Israel is sponsored by the FOI Equip, where you can learn your Bible from a Jewish perspective. And so the final classes of FOI Equip for the fall or for the winter is Christian Support for Israel. And Daryl, whether you knew it or not, you were kicking off our fall sessions on Christian Support for Israel through the Thank God for Israel Day. Later this month, I believe starting November 10th, we're going to have a 2-session class starting Thursday, November 10th on Zionism. That'll be taught by Paul Pierce. It's going to look at biblical Zionism. And then it's also going to look at political Zionism, the history of Zionism and how they mesh together in God's guiding of Zionism. And then finally, in December, we're honored to have David Brogg, who is the former executive director of CUFI, Christians United for Israel. And he is also just ran for congressman in Nevada for the Republican Party. He didn't win his primary, but I'll tell you something, David Brogg, as a Jewish man, has a lot of experience in Christian Zionism. So he's going to talk about the importance of Christian Zionism, which you've been hearing tonight from Daryl. But Daryl kickstarted, whether he knew it or not, our Christian Support for Israel fall and spring classes. So if you'd like to register for Zionism, or you'd like to register to hear David Brogg speak, you can simply go to FOI Equip, FOI like Friends of Israel, foiequip.org. And there you could register for all the classes. And I'll just say this, Tim, you know this deal. It's free. All the classes are free. Such a deal, as our good friend Steve Herzig would say. They're all free classes, so you can come, sign up. And if you can't make it, no problem. On demand, Daryl, this class will be online on YouTube. And also future classes will be online on our YouTube FOI Equip page as well. And I'll leave you with that, Tim, to close the night out.
What a joy it's been to meet with you, Daryl. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for each one of you who came and attended, took the time to join us. We are delighted. This is the conclusion of our 17th annual Thank God for Israel Day here in Detroit. And thank you for joining us. And with that, we will say Erev Tov, good evening, and the Lord bless you, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Good night.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl.
God bless.
Until we
Thanks for
meet
all you're
again
doing.
in person, I hope next time.
Oh, yeah,
thank
that'd
you.
be better.
God bless you. Good night.
God bless. Bye, everyone.